Hey Walter, how's it going?
It's going great, Mendy, and yourself?
Good. I'm loving the background. He has a Falcons locker room background, which is pretty cool and perfect for the setting that we're in right now.
Yeah, I just find that one of the things I do when I coach, I really like to make people comfortable because I do a lot of coaching online.
Hmm.
So if it's a football player, I like to have a football background. It just so happens that one of my football players I'm coaching right now, his favorite NFL team is the Atlanta Falcons.
Hmm.
So that's why I actually have that. And other hockey players is Pittsburgh Penguins. So
Nice.
with having a green screen, I could just create the environment to put them at ease and also get them to visualize themselves of where they'd want to be too, right? So,
Very cool. Awesome. So for those of the listeners that don't know what you do, tell them a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you go with your expertise.
okay. Um, my name is Walter Aguilar, and I am a core performance, not only core performance, but leadership transition coach. I am IPEC trained, and I was one of the first 25 to get basically go through the core program, which is really all about. I guess I've had about 4 years to talk about this, 3 4 years to think about this,
Hmm.
and really just what it is. It's a systematic approach to mindfulness in sports and in life, based on the understanding that our thoughts create seven levels of energy. We all emit energy. We all know that because if you've been to any sporting event, you could feel the momentum going back and forth. But these seven levels of energy are actually seven levels of consciousness, awareness, engagement, confidence. And it makes a big difference of where we are in the level in regards to our performance. The core performance dynamic special, the part of it is understanding how our consciousness works and how it affects our engagement and our confidence through the actual core performance model. It really comes down to this: is that what I do is I teach people that the roles that we play in life is not who we are; it's what we do, and it's based on an equation that performance equals potential minus interference. And essentially, what I do is I spend a lot of time fleshing that out because performance, whatever role, whether we're a hockey player, basketball player, football player, whether we're a student, employee, none of these roles are who we are. It's what we do.
Right. It's like the clothing we wear.
Exactly. So what happens though is that the performance is really the result of the choices we make in the moment. And these choices come from our ability to tap into our skills and talents, and also to act and to be able to connect to creativity and intuition. When we're totally in the present moment, we make those conscious choices in the moment. The choice that we make are either gonna serve us and those around us, or it's not. It's really simple, and it's really not about right or wrong. It's about being more effective or less effective.
Right.
And what happens is that the thing that affects potential is interference, which is really just distractions, and they come in the form of stress reactions. So,
Right.
in a nutshell, what I do is I help a lot of people, whether they're athletes, whether they're executives, salespeople. It doesn't really matter because those are all just roles, and their performance, especially in performance-based industry, it's all about outcome performance. It's about what
Right.
have you done for me lately.
Hmm.
In order to do that, a lot of these people, these athletes, these executives, these people in general, have to access that zone or the flow. And so, what I'm able to do is I have a systematic way to teach that, to assess it, to quantify it, and ultimately to help people show up in their best version of themselves during that performance. And that's essentially what I do.
Very cool. Yeah, that was very detailed description of exactly what you do. Very good. So I was hearing that you're basically everybody has thoughts that go through our mind because we're human beings, right? And if those thoughts are not up to par, if you will, or if they get in the way with through interference, that will affect our performance, right? So what are some ways that someone can control those thoughts and control those emotions, if you will, to allow them to be completely there in the moment, present in the moment, mindful and ready for whatever task they need to accomplish?
Well, I think that it's really to understand that it's a process, right? And that when you think about the foundational principle that the only constant thing in life is change, right? Is really able to learning how to be aware of what happens in the inner mind as well what's happening in the outer awareness, right? So the very first step to even understanding and really to performing at your best is really working on the skill of awareness, right? And that's one of the things. And because what happens is that for many people, what happens is because we're talking about the idea that performance is the choices that you make in the moment. A lot of people are often under the illusion that they're making choices, but the reality is they're basically when you consider the fact that a lot of us have beliefs, experiences, fears, all that lies in our subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often what happens is that we think that we're actually making choices in the moment, but we're actually making choices based on the past or fear of the future.
Mm.
And when you think about the sport, it's happening right now,
Right.
right? So learning how to become more present in the moment is going to, and being able to see the game for where it is, it's actually in the moment. It allows you the opportunity to make choices in that moment that are going to help you to perform better.
Right.
So to answer your question, how do we get there? I think that um, that's part of the thing that happens with a lot of athletes, right? And it's no different than if I was when I was younger. It's about we don't want to know about the process. We want to know how do we get to the outcome.
Right.
Right? It's I deal
The
with
world we live in, right? Instant gratification. We want it now.
well, a lot of it is it's interesting because I've done a lot of I guess most of my people they're high performers either in sport or in business. So I seem to attract a lot of these high performance people.
Right.
And one of the things that I realized about them is that there's a commonality that comes up is that they're all about the outcome focus. But what's interesting is that even the sport or the business about the outcome focus for the actual uh, athlete or executive themselves, they tie in a lot of their significance, self-worth, and their relevancy to the outcome.
Right.
Right? So what happens is that they don't really want to know about the process. Like, how do I get that outcome? Right.
Right.
And which is really the question that you're asking me, right? Right? How do we get the outcome, right? And then the interesting part that it's not about right or wrong, right? It's not about that. It's about understanding that a lot of the sports that we have, a lot of the occupations that we have, right? It's about results,
Right.
right? Results matter, right? And so what happens is that we actually get programmed to think that way.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, right, is that if you're focused on outcomes and those outcomes you're not getting the outcomes that you want, right? Quite often it's because you're not 100% in the moment and your capacity and your potential is not really being utilized.
Right.
And how that gets affected by it's because we the reason why I love this equation that performance equals potential minus interference, it's kind of baseline. You can always go back to that and to when you're working with an athlete or even an athlete yourself, right? Because what happens, right, is that when we're looking to perform, we're looking to tap into that potential. And now the skills and talents, right, are all the 10,000 times
Hour. Yeah.
10,000 hours, right? Skills, you get it, the skill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your talents are you tall, are you small, do you have quick fiber? Like the talents are things that the talents are the things that you're kind of been given, right?
Right.
But what's really interesting is that your being in the present moment, right, requires you to be at a higher level of consciousness
Right.
and awareness, right? Remember I said it all begins with awareness.
Right.
When you could be totally in the present moment, you increase yourself in these energy levels till you get to the point of passion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're now connecting, you're not accessing anymore, you're now connecting to creativity and intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And when you really think about it, right? When we're talking about flow, when we're talking about zone, two of the big attributes of being in the zone or being in flow is that creativity, is that intuition. Because especially one of the sports that I teach a lot, or a lot of that I coach athletes in, is hockey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that.
Hockey, if you're thinking out there, you're one step behind.
Right.
Right?
And hockey's, and in my personal belief, is probably one of the hardest sports, if not the hardest sport to play, because essentially you're playing two sports at once, right? You're figure skating and you're playing hockey, and you're trying to avoid a concussion all at the same time.
And you know, and the thing about hockey, it's not about thinking, it's about being. And then all of a sudden we get to the being thing, right?
Right.
And the thing is, because what happens, right, is that when you are able to be fully conscious in the moment, right, what happens is that you have full access to the zone, because there's nothing detracting it from it. You're totally in the moment. Intuitively, you know what to do. It's the difference between playing a game and being the game.
Right.
Right. This interference comes from stress reactions, right? Mm-hmm. And there is no stress. This is kind of interesting. I heard about this once, and
I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. So Dwayne Dyer said this. I was listening to him, and he's kind of, I listen to a lot of different people, right? Because I believe wisdom's everywhere, right? Even this whole thing about the core and energy, like it's awesome, it's great, it's a tool. We didn't invent the zone. Right. We didn't create mindfulness. Nobody's an expert in mindfulness, right? That's why it's called
a concept. It's constantly being learned.
Yes, right. So the thing is that when we're totally in the present moment, so we've got that. Now the distractions, right? Because there is no stress. There's only stress reactions. Life just happens as it does.
Right.
Our perceptions, our interpretations of what's happening is what creates the stress reaction. Mm-hmm. Right? And how does this happen? Well, there's two things that happens and why we create stress, right? And it's the very reason why sometimes our level of conscious awareness drops, right? Because we're taking something personal and we're defending, protecting our ego-created sense of self, right?
Yep.
Or we're over-attached to an outcome,
right?
The over-attachment. And we know that when we over-attach an outcome, we're giving our power away. Because therefore, when we do that, that outcome has the power to make us happy, sad, feel worthy, unworthy, right? So we're actually giving our power away. Right. And when we do that, we actually reduce capacity, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens is that, so stress reaction, just to go back to this. So stress reactions are, we perceive it. So it comes from 6 different areas, right? It could be spiritual, the love of the game. Are you congruent with your values and beliefs? Are you loving who you're with, your teammates, right? So it's all got to do with a lot of the intangibles, right?
Right. Like also like playing for a greater purpose as well, right?
Correct. That's why you'll see a lot of football players. They do a lot of prayers at the start. They understand, you know what? Yeah, this is a battle. People talking about organized violence, but for them, it's still a spiritual act, right? It's a spiritual act of worship. They're sharing their gifts with the world, sort of idea.
Right. Gratefulness is another one. Gratitude is another one.
Big one, right? Mm-hmm. So all those fall into the spiritual. And if things aren't really jiving for you in there, you're going to create a story that you're going to go into self-protection mode, right?
Right.
And that's going to lower your capacity, right? Because that stress reaction is what reduces your potential. And how that happens, by the way, I'm going to get back to the other 5 points. Okay. How that happens is that you, when you get into horizontal thinking past the future,
right?
Right. What happens is that it requires energy. And since energy can't be created or destroyed, right? It can only be shifted or transformed, right? It has to come from somewhere. So it comes from the present moment. That's why if you've ever had a day where all you've done is mental things and you feel exhausted, it still required energy.
Right.
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 So what happens is that when you go and you get one of these, say the spiritual, you don't love hockey or your sport anymore. It's just a grind and you're just going there, right? So then what happens is you start thinking about where you'd want to be or how you used to like to be on that team before. And now you don't really like this team and what have you, right? That energy comes from the present moment. So instead of being 100% in the moment, you become to 80, 70, 60, 50, right? And then at some point, again, the whole idea is at what point are you not in the zone anymore, right? The biggest question is we know when we're in the zone. Quite often, we don't even are aware that we're not in the zone because our level of awareness dropped. That's kind of the cool thing, right?
Right.
Is that when we're in the zone, we know we're in the zone.
Mm-hmm.
When we're not in the zone, we don't know we're in the zone because our level of awareness has dropped because of the interference and the stress reaction, right?
Right.
Does that make
Very
sense?
interesting. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you're familiar with NLP, but NLP teaches that we are everything that happens in our life is just information, right? Everything we see, everything we hear, everything that we feel is information, and our mind will put a interpretation to that information. And depending on where our mind is, or as you said, depending on what the interference is, will determine how we view the scenario. So two people could be given the same information and one person will see it negatively and one person will see it positively, which will have a positive effect on a performance or a negative effect on a performance. But again, it's just information that we're being given. And depending on how we see it, what kind of glasses we're wearing, which way we're looking, either the right to the left or to the past or the future, like you said, instead of being in the moment and being in the present, that will have an effect on the performance, right?
Totally. Example, you see somebody begging for money, right? Some people will see it as some people will actually ignore the person totally because they won't even have any awareness of somebody else, right?
Right.
Other people will kind of get indignant thinking, well, why don't you just go get a job? Or you're going to use all your money for drugs and alcohol, right?
Right.
Other people see it as an opportunity to express compassion
Mm-hmm.
without judgment, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of it depends on your level of consciousness and where you are and your understanding. Because the one thing that I also tell people is that not only is the roles we play not who we are, neither is our mind.
Right.
Right? Because the mind is a tool.
Absolutely.
Right? So then that's why hockey players can play and be not have to think. But if they're not thinking, then how are they playing?
Right.
Well, because they're being, right?
Exactly.
Right. So the whole idea that the mind's a tool, and the mind, the tool that we have is like our hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
It's been programmed already. We've got lots of programs in our hard drive, right? A
Right.
lot of them we weren't even aware or even had a choice of whether or not it got in there or not.
Right.
And
Right.
most people aren't even aware that they have a hard drive.
Right.
Or they don't want to believe that they're not making choices. What do you mean I'm not making choices in the moment, right? Even though if you look at their lives, they have a lot of patterns in relationships and in the way that they play. There's certain guys that play really well at home but terrible at away. Other times that play really good at away but not very good at home, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and you see that and they think, well, what's up with that? What? It's the programming, right?
Right.
In the mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how that the whole interference focuses. And then the other 5 areas are your mental, meaning what you focus on, for how long you do it for, basically because what you focus on is what you give energy to. What you give energy to expands and eventually shows up in your reality, right?
Absolutely.
The whole thing about multitasking, it's a myth. What we do is we go from one focus to another focus, one other focus, and when we try to multitask, essentially what happens, and they always say that men aren't as good at multitasking as women. It's just that we're used to focusing on something and then giving it the concentration
Right.
until we fix it or we achieve some kind of an outcome with it.
Right.
So having a lot of multi-focuses, we don't do it as well because we're not able to give it the amount of concentration or the time of focusing on it that we need to actually achieve what we need to achieve, right?
Right.
So mental aspect could be it. It could also affect if something's too hard or too easy, right? If we're it'd be very easy to get overwhelmed from a mental perspective. You just get traded to a new team. All of a sudden, you've got a whole new system to learn.
It's overwhelming.
So that can create stress. The emotional influencer. Emotions are interesting because emotions are driven by a belief that creates a story, that creates a sensation, which creates an emotion, right? So the storyteller, right? Some people are predisposed to tell themselves very negative stories about themselves, their lives. Once again, it's all from the hard drive, right? It's kind of interesting because I always use this analogy, right? Is that if you've got a lot of self-esteem, a lot of emotional owies, a lot of not feeling good enough, all that kind of stuff that a lot of therapists do great work with, by the way. Mm-hmm. It's like watching a comedy. Think about your funniest comedy and then having the soundtrack of Friday the 13th or Freddy Krueger. Right? You're sitting there watching the comedy. You're supposed to be laughing and happy, and you're just waiting for the comedian's head to get chopped off.
Right.
and how this relates to performance is that sometimes high performers are really scrambling because they're afraid that somebody's going to find out that they're not as good as everybody thinks they are.
Right, which is coming down to what they're thinking about, what their beliefs of their self or their self beliefs are.
The story,
yeah.
And so what happens is that that's why some athletes, although they have a lot of talent, they self-destruct off the ice or off the field, mm-hmm. right? Because they can't reconcile their talents and their gifts with the fact that they don't feel worthy of it.
Right. And I think one of the biggest examples that I've found through my work and that I've seen in professional sports was the first pick in the NBA draft. I think it was 2012 or maybe 13, but Anthony Bennett was one of the top players in college basketball, and he went number one. And I don't think he ever scored more than 15 points, and I don't know if he's still playing in the league, but it's a perfect example of somebody that was doing so well when he believes in himself. And then the second that thought, or like you said, the second the story changed, the second he viewed himself differently, his whole entire game gets thrown off, and his whole professional career is over.
And the reason why is because he needed to be in the zone in order to perform at his best. And it's interesting that, remember I said that creativity and intuition are really attributes of being in the zone?
Right.
It's really interesting because there's a guy named Joe Dispenza. He wrote a book about overcoming ourselves. And he said that when we are in a creative state of being, we break the habit of being ourselves. Mm-hmm. In ourselves are all the limitations.
Right.
All the I'm not worthies and all the I don't deserve this. And I always tell people that you're not it's kind of like this. People, I like to always let them know that you're not broken. I'm not going to fix you, because in a lot of ways, I believe if we were cars, that we're all Lamborghinis, because God don't make Hondas, right?
Right.
Right. So what happens is that, but yet in our story, we see ourselves as those used Hondas. And again, Honda's a good car. So if anybody owns a Honda, I'm not dishing.
They go pretty far. They're good mileage.
Right? But just for the example, right?
Right.
So the thing is that people see themselves as like a used Honda, and then when people are complimenting them, they don't really understand why. They're complimenting them as if they're Lamborghinis, because they are, but in themselves they don't see that. Mm-hmm. Right. So that story will create stress reaction. It will create conflict in them.
Right.
So that's the emotional influencer. The physical influencer. It's really obvious, right? Your sleep, your nutrition, your just anything that's got to do with physicality.
Right.
Right. That can actually create. And the reason why is because somebody once said that your emotions are your biological response to your thinking. Right.
Right. Absolutely.
So your feelings follow your thoughts. Your thoughts originate at beliefs, right? So, but what happens is that somebody once asked me, well, can it go the other way around? Absolutely, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I forget what the exact number is. It's whether it's 80, 75, 85. I don't know. I'm not like an expert in this, right?
Right.
But that 85, let's go 80 just for the sake of it. 80% of our serotonin is created in our gut, right?
Yeah.
So our gut is where all our food goes into, right? Our nutrition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our gut is what's affected by shadow side behavior of drinking too much, eating too much, smoking, doing drugs, doing whatever. Our gut gets affected,
Right.
Which serotonin has been known to have a physical effect of joy, peace, calmness, right? So the physicality, yeah, it can actually go the other way, right? If you're not, and for example, I had this young teenager who kept on having a lot of depression and there's a lot of concentration issues, right? And then all of a sudden he decided to, as the teenagers do, not stop smoking pot, have better nutrition, and get more sleep, and now they're happy.
Yeah.
And they're
That's
more
magic, right?
they're more engaged, right? And what's really cool is that he put two and two together. Right? He finally got two and two together.
Hmm.
It's great when you got a frontal lobe that helps you to do that, right? Because he's now 22, but he's doing this for all his teenagers. And his mom told me, well, he's a teenager. I could never tell him this, right? Because our frontal lobe isn't fully developed. So sometimes at teenage years, we don't get the connection. But at some point we do, right? So yeah, if I do that, that happens. Okay, well, I shouldn't do that, right? Then you're talking about your social. Social is the relationships that you have with people, your coaches, your trainers, your parents, your girlfriends, everybody, right? And interpersonal relationships are really can be really have a real impact on our performance because of the fact that it can cause energy drops. It can cause us to go into the poor me, I'm a defective life, or the angry, which again, those energies at the catabolic stage, when we're in those energies, we block creativity, intuition, and our emotional intelligence drops to the point where we go from stimuli to reaction, and there's no space in between, right? So our personal relationships, interpersonal relationships, play a big factor because, and one thing I want to talk about is that we're not also think about this is that it's not about just that these areas are where all the stress is found, right? These also are areas that can raise your energy. That's why they're called influencers, right? They influence you to drop, but it can also influence you to increase, right? Because if all of a sudden, I don't know if what you were like when you were younger and playing sports, your girlfriend shows up, all of a sudden
your whole game changes.
all of a sudden you're back checking.
Yep.
Right? Because it's all of a sudden you're inspired, right? Just right. Yeah. And then the final one is the environment, right? The environment you're in, right? How draining is that environment? Like, what do you perceive the environment? If you feel that you're at a job that's just sucking the life out of you, yeah, you're not going to perform at your best. You're not going to be engaged. You're not going to be there, right? If you don't like the team you're on, I mean, listen, a classic example is it Ryan O'Reilly from Buffalo? Talking about how he's lost the love for the game. Yeah. You know what? Part of it was that's a spiritual influencer, but part of it is also the environment, right? Yeah.
And one of the biggest examples I would give, two of them actually. One of them is climate, which I know is important. And also in the NBA Finals a couple years ago, when the Heat were playing the Spurs, the AC blew out in the arena, and suddenly every player's they all got they got shuffled. Like, oh my God, what do we do? Like, it's too hot in here. I can't play. And it was really a test to see how well someone was able to go through and figure out how to, like you said, be creative and try to figure out how to get through that moment when it's not perfect and it's not the ideal weather to play basketball in. How can you get through that? How can you perform when that environment is being pushed to your limits? You're right. The environment is so important in regards to like all these things that are going on around you. The other one was kids playing playing sports, and like you said, someone lost love of the game, you find all the time that a kid loses the love for a game because of the way their coach is treating them, or because of the way their parent is treating them, the way they're talking to them, the way they're trying to micromanage the way they play and the way they're performing. And the kid loves basketball when he's 5, 6, 7, 8. And then when he turns 10, 11, 12, he's like, why did I ever start playing this sport? My coach is screwing me all day long. My parents, I can never have any mommy or daddy time because it's always about my performance. And it sucks their love out of the game.
It's all about the next camp. It's about the next specialist that they're going to get me, the skating coach, the skill coach. It goes on. The environment of that where parents in a lot of ways are kind of living their lost dreams to their kid, right? And that's a very catabolic environment, and it drains their energy, and it sucks it out of them, right? And even having an environment where you're losing all the time, right?
Yeah. Would you say there's one of those influencers that are more detrimental or more helpful to performance, or would you say they're all equal?
I would say the spiritual. It's kind of interesting because you can work with all the other ones, but when somebody's lost the love of the game, it's difficult. Just even think about even relationships, right? When the love is gone, what do you got, right? Right, just got an empty shell, right? And see, and what's really hard about sports is that it's all about outcome focus, right? And if you haven't got a love for the game anymore, you're just going to go through the motions, and it's going to show up on the outcomes, right?
Right. And I know Joel Embiid, who plays for the 76ers now, his whole motto and his slogan, if you will, is trust the process, because he understands that it's not necessarily always about the result. You know, sometimes you can shoot a ball, but if you didn't shoot it properly and you made it in, that's not necessarily a good thing, because if you continue to do that, you won't make it every single time. But if you know that you're shooting the ball properly, but it's not going in, but you continue to just trust the process and continue to do what you know is right and what's the proper way to shoot, it'll come as time goes on. And somebody we both know, Bruce Schneider, which is the founder of the school that we both went to, he gives an example of someone that's playing baseball, and the hitting coach says, hey, I want you to hit the ball to center field, right? Because let's say there's a gap in the middle of the field, and I know that will probably be the best hit for you, and it'll either bring in a run or get you on base. And the hitter hits to center field, and the center fielder comes in and dives and catches the ball. Did the hitter do something wrong? No, that time the center fielder came in and made the catch. But the next time he might not come in to make the catch, and he'll get on base. And the next time, the next time, the next time. And his whole idea is focus on where you want to hit the ball, not necessarily what you want the result to be, but what the process you want to be.
Totally, because but here's the interesting part. We have systems that are set up all about outcome. And right. I even had a professional hockey player who challenged me on this. He goes, Walt, yeah, I like this process stuff that you talk about. He goes, but I get paid to score goals.
Right.
If I don't score goals, I go from the second line to the third line to the fourth line to waivers. I go down to the minors, and I lose 75% of my income.
Right.
So yeah, I'm focused on outcome, right? And in the same way that even in hockey, if you're not drafted by Bantam, which is about 13, 14-year-olds, onto a junior team, you could feel washed out by the time you're 14 or 15 years old.
Right.
Right. And the thing is that what I kind of said to him was that the idea, and because this is where the transition also falls into too, right? The success isn't about the outcome. It isn't about the gold at the end of the rainbow. It's about the journey there, right? And if you learn to thrive in the process, learn to love the process, right? The game is always played in the now. It's not played in the past or in the future. Yes, you can do visualization, right? Mm-hmm. And but however, right, it's actually played in the moment. Right. right? So learning to love the moment, learning to love everything about the game, about the process, right? When you can be present in the process, once again, we're going to be into that passionate stage, that inspired, right? Your likelihood of being in that zone where you have access to not only your skills and talents, but your creativity and intuition. I'm a believer that you can increase potential.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask, is the difference between talent and skill. Do you believe that one is given and one, meaning could anybody become a basketball player? Is that within your realm of belief, or is it there's some things are God given and some things are?
Well, I think that anybody can become anything. Can they become an effective is a whole different story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Right? Because anybody can pick up a ball and shoot up at a basket. Anybody can join an intramural league and go out there and run around, and right. So yeah, I think anybody can become anything, right?
Right.
Because the idea is not to are you good at it or are you bad, right? Because really, even somebody that's playing intramural, are you bad? No, you're just not as effective, right?
Right.
And that's where remember we talk about the skills and talents.
Right.
Well, if you're 5'2", right, you don't necessarily have like when you think about the talents, right, or the part of that is the fact that you're 5'2". You're not 6'4", right?
Right.
Your skills are the things that you work on, right? Are the things that you continuously habitually work on your free shot, right? And how do we know that you can increase potential? Well, there's been some pretty short basketball players, and
Right. Right. And that's what I was going to say, that there's some people that are fond about the idea of self-awareness, right? Like be self-aware. Like some people would say, dude, you're delusional. You're 5'9" or you're 5'4" and you want to go play basketball. You're in the wrong league. You're just in the wrong book. Like get your head out of
well,
the rut.
you know what's interesting. I actually this triggers something for me because
I get
I think that somebody once asked Dwayne Dyer, and I like some of the Dwayne Dyer stuff. Just kind of some of it just makes sense to me, right?
Mhm.
And he says that you can basically do anything that you put your mind to, right? But it has to feel authentic to you,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, anybody can become a basketball player, right? But not everybody can become a professional basketball player, right?
Okay.
Because if it doesn't feel authentic to you, right? If it's right, if it felt authentic to you, then you might be one of those ones that actually break through and actually are doing it, right? If you have a passion about it, and right, and also it requires a lot of focus and time on skill development, right? That not everybody's ready to give their whole life over. Not everybody wants to leap a particular sport because it doesn't feel congruent with who they are as people, right?
Right. So am I hearing that authenticity will lead to the proper or the love to put in the work that will get you to where you want to go?
Yeah, because you got to follow flow, right?
Right.
Right, because it's the one thing that I find is we talk a lot about power versus force, right? Because it's the name of my company, right? Power
Right.
versus Force Inc. And power is effortless, right? Doing is work, and you force games, right? If you really look at even athletic performance, right? When you have players that things are, you could really tell a lot about a player by how he plays when things aren't going well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because one of the aspects of this whole uh, interference and how it affects performance is the fact that sometimes we're not at a 10 for whatever reasons, right? You may be a new parent and you've got a kid and you don't have the opportunity to just not be there, right? So you don't get as much sleep. You may be going in at an 8 or 7 or 8, learning how, and it's a concept that somebody once said, learning how to play bad well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Learning how to play when you're not at your 10 well.
Yeah.
Quite
Absolutely.
often what will happen is that guys will go into a game and they've had a little bit of stress around them, and And again, we're human, so we're not always managing it well, and sometimes, or you have back-to-back games where the physical influencers has affected you, right? Sometimes when people go in and they go out at a 7 or so, they can feel that they're at a 7,
Yeah.
but then they end up showing up at a 5 or a 4.
Right. Right. And I think someone that's a master at playing well when they're playing bad is Steph Curry from the Warriors, where we've seen the coach come over to him and say, hey, look, Steph, just because you're not making shots doesn't mean you can't do other things on the court, or you are doing excellent things on the court besides for not shooting the ball well. Like, don't beat yourself up just because the ball's not going in the hoop. You're playing excellent on defense. You're getting rebounds. You're getting steals. Those other pluses and minuses matter more than just, again, going to the outcome, more than just making the shots. There's other things that matter where you can play well and be effective and help the team as a whole, as opposed to you just getting your stats up in the points category.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example of this, right? I'm dealing with a football player now, and the one thing that he said was that because we're talking about how losing affects him emotionally. He goes, yeah. He goes, I find even when I try my best and we lose, it still really sucks, and I get all upset about it, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, really? Okay, so let's reason this out, because now he's got a frontal lobe. So I thought I'd reason this out, right? How many guys are on your team? He goes 60. Okay, how many guys actually play in a game? Usually 24, right? So I said, so there's 24 guys. So whether a team wins or loses is based on 24 guys doing their job, right? So you have $1,000. You have a roulette wheel. There's 24 numbers on there, right? You put all your money on one number, right? And then you got a 1 in 24 chance. Would you really put all your money on the table? What would you do? He goes, I'd walk out. Why? Because my odds of winning aren't that great. Right? Oh. So what you're saying is that in order for you, even though you've done your best and whatever your best was that day, that because 23 other guys or any one of the other 23 guys weren't performing at their best, that you're going to allow that to affect you. Oh, okay. And he started thinking about it, right? And then he goes, that little light bulb came on. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Right?
Mm-hmm. And it shows on his mindset.
What's that?
It shows on his mindset.
Yeah. Because it's all about the outcome, right? Mm-hmm. It's all about the outcome, right? And that's really, they always say it's all about the that's that song, I forget. It's all about the that really famous song. It just slipped my mind right now, right? It's but anyways, the whole idea is that we're all trained to think that it's all about the outcome, and it's not. It's about learning how to thrive in the process, learning how to be present, how to enjoy what you're doing, and to be able to be aware of what's happening on the inside as well as what's happening on the outside, right?
Right. And an example I always give is when you reach that goal or that peak or that success, whatever that is to you, let's say it's a championship, you're not going to look back at the championship. You're going to look back at the entire process and journey, like you said, of getting there. And you're going to be like, oh my God, remember that game 7 that we won just by that buzzer beater at the tip of our tongue? Like, that's what you look at. You don't look at, oh, hey, I got a trophy. Like, that's so cool. If I gave you a trophy, you wouldn't appreciate it. It's the hard work and that journey and the process that really makes the trophy mean so much more.
Ideally, like on paper, that sounds good, but really most performers, they're looking at what's the next where's the next thing to get to.
Right.
Sometimes a lot of them don't take the time to smell the coffee.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They just got to move on to the next, well, what's the next thing? Because they have a momentary feeling of significance, of self-esteem. Okay, now what I got to do? Okay, now I've won the championship in university. Okay, now am I going to make an NFL team? Am I going to do this? Like it's always the next thing, right?
And I think that's where the spiritual influence comes in. Is a spiritual influence where you have to look back and appreciate what you've done so far. And that I don't mean that in a way of settling for what you've become, because then you can't become great. You have to always increase and set higher expectations for yourself. But at the same time, you have to look back and be grateful for what you've done, how far you've come. Otherwise, you're constantly chasing, and it never stops.
Yeah, because what happens is kind of like all the greyhounds that chase the bunny.
Yeah.
The bunny's not real.
Right.
Over there is not real. Because if you ever gone hiking and you reach a certain plateau, like you look at something and you say, okay, I'm going to go to that place. And once you get there, you realize that wasn't the end.
Right. I've seen that way too many times.
So then you're there's a thing called the grouse grind here in Vancouver, right? And what's really interesting is that you start walking and it's a mile like straight up, but the first part of it is kind of almost a little bit flatter. So it feels like you've gone a long way. And then you finally come to a sign and you're already kind of starting to get exhausted, right? You're quarter of the way there.
Yeah.
It's like, holy cow, it's like, this isn't like you're thinking, okay, at some point we're and that's that whole thing is that life is a journey. The only constant in life is change. It's not about the outcome, because the outcomes will give us a momentary feeling of satisfaction, but it won't last. Because what we do is when we become outcome focused is we give our power away. Right. And eventually what that does is that lowers our capacity in the moment. And eventually we're not playing the game we love anymore. That's just the way it goes, right? If you keep on doing that. And then if you are one of the few that, because when you think about the percentage of actually make it to professional sports, it's such a very low number, right? But you think of all the people that play sports, right? And what happens to them afterwards, right? We have all these athletes being thrown into society, all about outcome focus, and then they're out there trying to get jobs. So what have you done? Oh, I threw baskets for the last 12 years, or I threw a football, right? It's like, oh, okay, oh, that's great. So there's advantages and disadvantages with the hyper focus that sometimes athletes have, right? Because I think that we also got to know that for some athletes, having that focus and having that carrot to go to is what drives them, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the whole idea of the energy blocks, like what blocks energy, because really the issue isn't whether or not you can be in the zone or I could be in the zone. Any of us can be. We all have had these different experiences where life just flowed. It could be a sport that we played many years ago. It could even be yesterday where you were calling the right people at the right time. Everybody's saying yes. There's flow, right? It happens all the time because we're all just in a different role.
Right.
And athletics just happens to be one of them, right?
Right. Wow, such good stuff, such good information. Okay, so just finishing up here real quick, in very briefly, what does success mean to you? If maybe a sentence.
Like success is just really learning to thrive in the process, and really understanding that thriving is about learning to be in the present moment and making conscious choices of how you want your life to unfold.
Well said. Okay, cool. Second question is, what's one piece of information you wish you knew when you were 23 years old? Or your 20s?
One piece of information that I'm not the story,
right?
That I'm the storyteller. So that I have the ability to edit or change my story whenever I want if it's not working for me.
Right.
Know that. I thought I was my story.
Right. Wow. Okay, and lastly is, what's your favorite book or movie?
Favorite book or movie? I'd say one of my
both if you want.
more favorite ones was probably The Four Agreements. It's just really I thought that was one of my favorite books. I can still read it and still get lots out of it. I think Four Agreements is good. I have lots of books that I enjoy. As far as movies, actually to this day I still like Forrest Gump.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Just a guy that just knew how to follow flow.
Yeah.
Right. And I because I think about it, he was a bit of my part of the movie was why I became a coach, but I wasn't Forrest Gump. I was Bubba Gump. I a bubble gump of coaching. I was going to coach athletes, and I was going to coach executives and special needs couples, and I was going to have this and that and that, and eventually it came true because
Wow,
I kept on talking about it. Right.
that's awesome. Very cool. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we'll definitely have to do this again because there's so much information that we haven't even touched upon yet that is so valuable.
Yeah, I just threw a bunch of stuff at you today, so.
It's perfect.
But it's and everybody the thing that also everybody thinks is it's so simple. Yeah, it is. But we have this mind that has been nicely programmed in our age where we're having to, a lot of times it's about learning how to overcome ourselves, right, to perform at our best, right? Because the things that we really want, the reason why we don't have them is because we haven't learned to become the people that we need in order to be able to really attain that, right?
Right.
So learning, and that's where being able to be more creative and more intuitive in our lives could really go a long way, right? So that whole idea of self-transcendence, right, of being in that level 6 and 7 energy, right? So,
Right. Yeah, and that's that could be a whole nother episode talking about the 7 levels, which I don't know if viewers know yet, but they'll learn about it as time goes on.
yeah, it's but anyhow, it's yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I love talking about this, as you could see. I could easily hold court, which I do sometimes, but I just thought that since we're talking about performance and really what we're actually talking about is the way that people live their lives, right? It's
Yes.
sport and life is no different because how we do something is how we do everything, right? So
Absolutely. Very good. Thanks so much.